Good evening, folks. Welcome to this interesting stream on Proper Horror Show. We're doing something a little unusual tonight. I obviously usually comment on horror films, but occasionally, just once in a while, for a special treat, I like to annoy pretty much everyone on the entire internet. Every single one. When I criticize 12 Angry Men, when I make the smallest intimation that perhaps it's not all above board, that perhaps the impression that most people have of the film is a little bit skewed. It seems to annoy people a lot. It seems to awaken a great fury in them that few other things can. Now, I've talked about this before, and I've talked about the logical arguments made in this film and how they don't hold up. I've also been very impressed by Poe the Person's video on it, which I've linked in the description below. But I wanted to take another angle at this because a lot of Persuasion and 12 Angry Men is all about persuasion. A lot of Persuasion has absolutely nothing to do with the arguments. And so I wanted to bring someone on who knew all about persuasion. And for that purpose, we have a wonderful guest tonight, Ferro. Hello, friend.
Hi there, and thank you so much for having me on tonight.
It is an absolute pleasure. I really enjoy your streams where you're discussing advertising, marketing, ways that people are persuaded, very subtle messaging that can absolutely fly over people's heads. I just thought you'd be the perfect person for this.
Well, yeah, thank you for thinking of me, and it's a film that was for a long time very close to my heart. I originally watched the film over 10 years ago, and at that time in my life, I thought it was very inspiring, very captivating. But since that moment, I have come to believe that it is a far cry from what it's pitched as, and actually, when you spend some time deconstructing it, there is a lot of depth to it in terms of the persuasion that it's doing to the viewer. In my mind, yes, this is a film about a discussion about a group of men talking, but it's also about a single man talking and presenting a certain ideology and a certain strategy, and in a similar, it's interesting. We'll get more into it as we go through this idea of the kind of quiet, silent figure sitting in the background, controlling the narrative. So really interesting film. Hopefully, lots of discussion tonight. And please, if you haven't already, if you're a first time listener to the channel, make sure you subscribe now and leave a comment and as we go through. So
Excellent. Yeah, I think a lot of people will be in the place of, I still love this film. I think it's amazing. I love the acting. I think it's beautiful. At the same time, it's once you've looked under the hood and you've taken the moment, you've taken the time to just examine it outside of the emotion it's trying to get you to feel, it becomes a whole different ball game, as we will uncover.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe from that point, should we just go into it and talk about? I wanted to kind of start off with the background of the film and some little bits that people may not know about, if that's all right.
Please do.
Yeah. So 12 Angry Men actually began as a radio play. Now, if you are familiar with the theatre, as I like to think I am, that there are some subtle clues that this was originally a radio play, and I think the key thing for me is the lack of scenes. So, for those of you familiar with Hitchcock, I'm sure Horror Show you're very familiar with his works. Rope is the big analogous work, I would say, which also was originally a radio play, and just in the same way that Rope revolved around a group of men in a single scene, effectively talking. The same thing happens here. So it's these kind of like theater or radio play style movies have a different feel to them. They are claustrophobic. They have that intensity. I think that's a really good point about that. There is like an emotional roller coaster that the viewer goes on, and that's because it's been almost it's an artwork created in another area and transported to the visual one. But it's one that's been evolved as well. So again, this idea of the radio play where you're only hearing things has changed into something visual, and I think the director and the whole crew did an excellent job transferring it, because often it can be quite difficult. That the power of cinema is in its ability to create magical moments that don't exist in reality, or to create beautiful cinematography. You will not get any of that with this film. It's a bunch of sweaty men in a small room, basically. But what they do get is character and personality, and this is like looking through a microscope at America, but through a specific microscope as well. And I think it's worth talking about the director a second, a guy called Lumet.
Sidney Lumet.
Oh yeah, there we go. And of course, he is a New Yorker from a certain immigrant population, let's just say. And it's interesting that his entire background, often feels like is described as being filtered through his specific consciousness. And part of his greater hors d'oeuvre of works is about highlighting unique tensions and cultural diversity. And I think you need to recognize that there is this. America's at a certain point here. It's out in is it 1954? I think the film. This is kind of post Second World War. This is the kind of new, confident America, but it's an America with a lot of, I think, in the director's eyes, unsavory characters that don't match up to New America, and this is really. I think you could read this film as a critique of America, specifically Middle America and working class America. And as we'll go through the list of the jurors and the candidates, it's really interesting to see who Lumet chooses to highlight, and the personalities that they have at the same time. Now, maybe just to go into a little bit about the plot for those who haven't heard it. I saw a few people on Twitter checking it out. I mean, I do recommend watching the film. It is good to see. It's important to see. But fundamentally, this is about the jury deliberation in a murder case, and effectively, these 12 people are going to decide if a man, or you could say a young man, should die for and be charged. Sorry, should be charged with murder and ultimately be put in the electric chair. And the whole thing's framed that the verdict must be unanimous, so they need all 12 people to agree either innocent or guilty. The judge states that the death sentence is mandatory, and he specifically mentions this idea of doubt. You might. I can't exactly remember how he phrased it, but it's something to do with like that you should have no doubt in your decision, basically. So
if I may, you should be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt of the guilt of the defendant. So beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes, exactly. And so what we're going to see is these 12 men deliberate over this decision, and the long and the short of it is they initially find out what the opinion of those 12 jurors are, and 11 are 4 guilty, and 1, a single man stands alone who says it's not guilty. And the film is effectively the single man resisting the attacks of the 11 and convincing them to go for not guilty. And the big spoiler is the kid gets off. That is essentially what the plot is. But the depth is in the conversations, the debate and persuasion techniques that the various men use to try and convince each other. But now that's framed, I don't know if we want to kick off with some of your kind of initial insights and slides, and we can kind of talk through them maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like the way you cover it there. It's effectively, I think of it almost like a challenge. This film is a challenge. It's a puzzle. You're going in and it's just slam dunk. The kid's guilty. He's obviously guilty. And so how are you going to turn that around? It's a challenge, basically. And a lot of movies can be seen that way, as just a challenge. We recently talked about Gerald's Game, which I won't go into the details of, but effectively the plot structure is a similar series of challenges. Anyway, so in this one, I'd say let's frame it as how are you going to turn this jury around? These 11 people who are so certain. Well, you've got to persuade them, right? And I thought that this would be really interesting, this quote from Schopenhauer. But the thing is, I don't read Schopenhauer, but I figured if I put a really smart person's quote on there, it might help persuade people that I know what I'm doing. I thought a crafty trick like that can come in handy if you want to turn people's opinion around, you know. I realise this is an old point, but I've just picked up a few of the strategies that have been used here, and they could be sort of jumping off points for us. So if I wanted to make sure that, actually, maybe I'll take this one angle early on. I never believed for a second that Henry Fonda's Juror 8 is a disinterested person. I don't know if you were convinced on this, but I don't think it stands up for a moment that he's someone who is just interested in just wanting to get the right result. I think he's very much someone who is setting out to get the end result of a not guilty verdict.
Yes, and again, it's interesting watching this. You have to watch it a couple of times basically to pick up on this. Maybe it's worth just quickly touching on. I've got little notes on each of the jurors, if that's okay.
Oh, please, yeah.
Just to frame it again. And Juror 8 is effectively the protagonist of the film, right? He is the guy who says not guilty at the start. And he's first introduced to us staring out of the window, and it's exactly this picture. I described him as absolute Sigma at this point. Everyone else is having like these kind of conversations. He is just like a loner sitting outside of the room. And also, I mean, we've got to do a shout out for the general aesthetic of all of the men there. They're all in suits. And most of them smoking. I mean, he looks cool, and he's in this white suit. Part of the cleverness of the film is that there's mystery to these characters. We don't know who their names are. They're just known as jurors 1 to 12, but we pick up fragments of information as we go along. So Juror 8 is this protagonist. We find out later that he is an architect as well. I think it's worth noting his profession. Just quickly, the other jurors, just to kind of show you, going back to Lumet's point around showing New York City life. He's tried to capture a slice of life. If I were to do a cross section of Manhattan, who are the people in it? And you've got Juror 1. he's basically in charge of the proceedings, and he's like your kind of typical manager. We first see him arranging ballot papers. Number 2 is I've put him as the weedy man, and I will refer to him as the weed all through the rest of it. He is this kind of like nerdy pipe smoker, quite a nervous disposition. Number 3, I've got him down as the angry dad. Now, he is. We'll hear more about the dad later because I think that's important. But he is this. He's like a small business owner. I think he kind of gives out his business cards initially to one of the other members, but he says he owns like a couple of stores or something like that. So he's this kind of middle America, but quite brash man's man. Number 4 is the broker. So he is this kind of high finance, Wall Street, Southern Manhattan guy. He's very well dressed. He is cool as a cucumber. One thing to note, I talked about this idea of this kind of theatre setting. One kind of term that is used is this idea of the black box production, where there's a single scene and there's no set behind it. You're just set in this black box to create the sense of claustrophobia. They do the same where everything is set in this kind of claustrophobic room, but at the start you see everyone just sweating. So this idea of heat, the idea of this boiler room pressure, but the broker is a man unmoved by the heat. So again, you're already getting like an idea of these characters very, very early on. Number 5, I've got him down as running a small business as well. I can't remember exactly who he is. I haven't got I didn't manage to get who number 6 was.
I'm trying to remember. Is it Juror 5 or Juror 11 who is of basically the author stand-in? The author has a very similar background to the director. So the author, Reginald Rose.
Yeah, there's a German watchmaker who's like an immigrant who is number 11.
There we go. That's it.
Then I've got number 7, who is another features quite prominently. He is the sports fan. So he's really into baseball, and he wears what I would describe as a jaunty get-up. Everyone else is in like suits and ties, and he's wearing like a fedora. He's literally a fedora wearer. And he's keen to get out. Number 8 is the protagonist, like I said. Number 9 is just this old guy. Number 10 is he's relatively old. He's kind of like an energetic old man with prejudiced views. And I've put in brackets, he is the kind of racist stand-in, racist America, basically.
Oh, imagine.
Number 11 is the German watchmaker. And then number 12 is me. It's the madman. Juror 12 is my stand-in. Yeah,
He literally is, though, isn't he? He's an advertising exec.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, hold on a second. Oh yeah, Juror 5 is the he is the slum juror. We'll find out that later. And Juror 6 is the working man. So we've got white. Yeah, we've got white collar, we've got blue collar, we've got business owner, we've got big finance here. So real slice of life. And going back to your point here, Juror 8 stands out from the start as being this mysterious figure. And as soon as they start off with this kind of initial vote and he votes against it, already there's this huge tension in the room. Who is this character? What's he about? So sorry, I just wanted to frame that a little bit before we go into...
I think it's very useful. I'll also just answer this question. Poe, no, they don't. I don't believe they adjust the set, but they are using several tricks. So one of the things you notice over the course of the room, as they build and release tension, is that the camera will go closer and closer. And they'll also amp up the weather to make the atmosphere more tense. And then after they've been moving on to really close close-ups, then there's a sort of break in tension, usually when someone changes their vote or you have a sort of revelation of some point, then the camera suddenly pulls back again. And it's quite interesting how they do that. I think Fez has shown one of the other things. Yeah, the focal ranges of the cameras will also make things feel wider or more claustrophobic. So they do mess around with a number of those, but I don't think they actually adjust the set.
Just on the weather, I just wanted to mention as an aside, again, you've got this idea of, again, in the theatre world, the idea of prophetic fallacy, emotions being displayed in the weather. So, you've got the scene of in Blade Runner where the guy, tears in the rain or whatever, the idea of sadness equaling rain, but heat equals anger. So again, the idea of, I think, hotness equals anger. There is a rain period featuring coolness, and then there is a clearing of the skies at the end. So there's almost kind of like 3 periods of the film where the weather kind of correlates with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also there's the air conditioning unit that's broken until it gets fixed again is another way of doing the prophetic fallacy of effectively progress through the persuasion. The end point of this is very clear. It's persuading everyone that you get to a not guilty verdict. That's the end result. And then all the prophetic fallacy sort of signals your progress through that.
Yeah.
Which, this is good filmmaking as well as very crafty persuasion.
Well, this is it. I mean, this is next level propaganda. I think this is when the elites used to be like actually good at making stuff. Basically,
I think the average person doesn't believe this is propaganda, or if it is, that's a good thing. But we'll see.
Well, that's it. Yeah. Anyway, yes, let's.
Okay, so I think, again, it's going to really help if we focus on our job. We're Juror 8, or we're both Juror 8 and we're the screenwriter. We want to get that not guilty verdict. That's our job. And think of the film as a puzzle for how you do that. So the introductory framing, how would I do it? I want to bring the passions down. So I don't want to show you footage of the victim. I don't want to start off with showing you testimony, emotive narratives and witnesses that are talking about how much the victim suffered. I don't want to do that. I want to actually start you thinking of principles of justice. So I start the film off reifying the judicial process. So I show you these lovely heroic shots of the courthouse. They've got to be iconic. They've got to make you think not of the case, but I've got to make you think of justice. Justice in principle, justice the process. And I show you this heroic angle of the courthouse.
It literally pans up to the Court of Justice on the top as well. So again, it's almost like you're at the steps looking up at the entranceway. It's quite a good shot, I think.
Oh, this is all beautiful stuff. It's all absolutely beautiful. But my main thing in this is, if I want to persuade you, I'm going to try and keep you focused on principles. I kind of don't want you thinking about this case. I want you thinking about the principles of justice. If I feel like I haven't got a sort of strong case for a not guilty, I'm going to try and make you not think about that. So the sort of framing that we're coming in for is calm, principled. As I've written here, we must remain a beacon of justice, impartiality, and liberty, versus another mugging? This city's going to hell. That sort of thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important part. Just riffing off what you were saying, that there are, like I said, there are the direct aims of this film, and there are the meta aims of this film, right? The direct aims of the film is like you said, you want the character to get off, right? So the director wants you to feel like it should be a not guilty verdict on the lowest level, right? That's all of this is framed to deliver that. But like I said, the director is also trying to layer in some higher points of that that he wants to get across. I would say, firstly, that the judicial system, the authority of the country, and democracy as a whole works well. I think that's the major point. And I think it's important that we'll see all the way through this. The director ties justice to democracy, and also to the fact that this is a successful transaction, if that makes sense. This is all about building confidence in the system. The system works. Our ideas of justice work. So that's one of the. This is one of the kind of hidden names of the film. I think another hidden name of the film is America is a deeply misogynistic and racist place. That's what it's trying to say by highlighting all of these different characters. And again, we'll
sorry, that's my cat. Don't worry about it.
The cat approves.
Yeah.
And number 3, I think it wants a pro like minority and outcast message as well. So there's kind
100%.
of like there's kind of, so there's obviously the I should say the defendant is, I'm pretty sure they're implying he's of like Mexican or Puerto Rican origin.
I'll just get up a photo of him there.
Yeah, there we go. So you see a face. They never say his ethnicity at all, but it is implied all the way through by the reactions of some of the other Americans that they don't consider him to be one of them, basically, or for some of them. So that's kind of like one power block. There is a class dynamic as well, where he's also in the slum. So it's talking about the poor versus the rich at the same time. And then the third element is the immigrant versus American as well. So there's the ethnic, the class, and the migration status. All those 3 minorities are, the characters from those areas are deified or certainly like amplified in their ability. Middle America is demigrated. The working class actually is portrayed relatively well in this, and we'll see it as we go through. And actually, the banking class is portrayed well as well. It's specifically the small business owners were and the salespeople. This idea of Middle America is attacked. So just going back to just recapping that, the points. The points behind this are yes, we want the non-guilty verdict, but also there are these hidden messages that the director is trying to get across. And by engaging with the film, we're sort of being led down the garden path. If you get suckered into the kind of non-guilty narrative, then you start to kind of nod along and start to agree with all of this stuff. But there are these kind of hidden subversive elements to it, which I think are very interesting, that most people don't address. They just sort of nod along, and they're, do you know what I'm saying? That they're kind of brought in by the bigger overarching point.
Oh, absolutely. I think if you're persuaded by it, you do end up taking all those ideas on. Also, that your end result is a successfully applied process. Everything becomes quite depersonalized. I'm sure we'll touch on this, but the successful role of the jury is to be impartial appliers of a process. You know, you've done a good result if you've worked through jury steps 1 through 7.
Yeah,
and found him not guilty.
Exactly.
It's not about, you know, like, have we made the world safer? Have we have we made the world safer? Have we avenged the murdered, etc.? There's a big thing of, well, one of the persuasive tactics is basically, look, we just got to stick to the process. We're all subordinated to this process, and we just have to follow it.
Exactly, and I think that's what, there's an important point about why it's tied to ideas of democracy as well, because if this can work, where 12 people of variety of class and ethnicities and statuses in society can come to the right decision, then all democratic decisions are identical to that. So again, that's one that I want people to just keep that in their head as we're going to go through this, because I think that the director sneakily highlights these points again and again and again. And while you're rooting for this guy, you're convincing yourself about those other points. But I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to talk about with that first scene at all before I rudely interrupted.
Not at all. No rudeness. This is all fine. Yeah, I just thought that's a good jumping off point. But you've elaborated on it, and I think built on the point very well. That yes, there's a lot more smuggled in under that heading. So I'll be quick with this. You'll all be very familiar with this. Young defendant. Now he's 18. I'll point out, in my original video on this, where I dealt with the arguments, I referred to him as 15, and people have never shut up about it. Just going like, he's not 15, he's 18. You got this whole thing wrong. Like, his trousers aren't turquoise, they're cyan. Idiot. Clearly not guilty. Drives me mad. Anyway, so for the record, he's 18.
Can I just talk about that? Because I think, again, the age is very important, because he's just eligible for the electric chair. And again, I think this is part of the cleverness, where he's creating a situation that is abnormal from reality. So again, it's kind of like, this is not taken from a real life case. These are not real life jurors. These are not things that actually happened. He has cherry picked and totally imagined a circumstance where this has happened, specifically to build up an emotional response in the viewer. If this was an average case in America, maybe it would be like a 35-year-old criminal who had a much bigger back history. Do you see what I'm saying? That he chose not to do that case. He chose to find the most sympathetic person he could do, this innocent-looking waif of a young lad, and say, "Would you hang him, or would you kill him in the sake of justice?" So
yeah. If I may, I'm not even sure that this scenario, I mean, I haven't looked into it, but the scenario of you hang him or you release him, that seems a little questionable to me. And it also seems to really stack the die. Like, nominally, you're the jury. Your job is this guy guilty? But they kind of substituted that question for, are you going to hang him? Like, the film wouldn't work if the punishment was, a Chinese burn and, 5 minutes of nuggies. It wouldn't work. But they've thrown in the hanging as if, I mean, you're sure, but are you hang him sure? It's very sneaky.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, again, the stakes are high. That's they've machinated. Again, one of the genius elements to this, they've machinated this false example. It's almost like a straw man, like a reverse straw man. I don't know if there's an argumentative term for this.
A steel man?
Well, yes, yeah. Well, sort of. I mean, they've created a situation that doesn't exist in an attempt to prove their argument in a way. But yeah, I think that again, this scene is super important, where you're just seeing, look at this little. I really like your you wouldn't hang this small bean, would you? I think that's great. Just these little innocent eyes.
Can I say something that might sound really stupid?
Please do. Yeah.
I think it's cheating to put him in a shirt. The convention of dressing someone for court is like they've dressed him in formal wear, which is they try to make him look nice, but that already feels like it's trying to persuade you. Now, I know everyone does this, but I feel like trying to push everyone into formal wear is trying to make the defendants look respectable, whereas, maybe a lot of the typical criminals who go around stabbing folk wouldn't naturally be doing so in a shirt and tie.
Well, I mean, this is the classic thing, isn't it, where the the legal professionals will dress up their clients to make them look more reputable. So it's a thing that has happened for a while. I have to say, full disclosure, several of my family members are lawyers, so I do I do know the kind of horrific tricks they get up to. And this is one of them. So I can actually say I think the shirt is believable, but again, it is about creating a respectable figure. If this guy was smoking, if he was like chewing gum, and just not bothered at all, like you said, this is it. We are seeing a fantasy from the mind of the writer rather than the reality of a case.
Yeah, it's something that does happen in the courts, but it's there to help persuade you. I'll throw you something else out that you'll be very familiar with. Is just like this presentation again. Look at him, small bean. You will be familiar from many cases that became very famous in the news recently. That the newspapers would publish a photo of the someone who'd been shot by police. They wouldn't show the video of them sort of committing a crime or their mugshots. They actually get criticized if they publish mugshots, but they'll try and find them, their high school photo. That was 3 years ago,
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing to sway public opinion, so that you're thinking of the high school student and not the person who has mugshots.
Yeah, and again, I think just looping this back to persuasion techniques, you've all heard of the expression "don't judge a book by its covers," but the reality is that most people do. And while the saying is correct that we should try to look at the character of a man, the external factors are like heuristics. That's why the physiognomy meme is definitely a bit of a joke, but I think there is some truth to it at the same time. For example, if you see someone who is exceedingly rotund, you know that there is part of their life that they are not in control of. While if you see someone who is swole, they've been to the gym regularly, you know that they have the discipline to be able to go to the gym every single day, to eat a disciplined diet. So some of the physical signs show you the character of the people, and I think that this idea of framing and building up the character of a person in the mind is super important. Now, if you want to get someone off, you need to make that character sympathetic. You need to make them feel like they could be innocent, and I think this scene here is super important for framing the defendant as not guilty. He looks like a not guilty boy that could have been taken from Middle America. Yuz and Chat mentioned that actually, that he looks European. I mean, to me, he maybe looks like Med, or like maybe an Italian or something like that. I think the fact that they've obscured the ethnicity of the person, and added that question into it again, makes him more innocent in our minds, if that makes sense. If he was this ox-faced brute, this horrible ginger Irish immigrant or something like that, with like a gnarled face, we wouldn't buy into it as much. There's some really interesting studies showing that beautiful people get paid more and are more successful in life. And I think the reality is that, unfortunately, most people don't look beyond the skin, and but at the same time, the director knows this and uses this against us.
Oh, definitely, and a lot of the work of the of this film and general pushed thinking is, don't use generalizations, don't use those kind of heuristics. Here's an amazing exception to the rule. God, imagine if you'd used the rule, you dummy. That's a very common trick. I thought this was a major one. This might be obvious, but it's worth pointing out. The biggest star, the most famous guy, the handsome hunk who's the leading man, he's the guy trying to persuade you. This film wouldn't be as successful if a randomer was doing it. By having Henry Fonda be Juror 8, the guy trying to persuade everyone, you've instantly brought a lot of people on side, because people are automatically assuming that they need to side with the admirable chap, the high status individual, the famous movie star. He's a guy they're already looking to align themselves with.
I think that's such a really clever point again. We naturally are drawn to the famous at the same time. Is he the most handsome character? I'm not sure about that. Again, I'm not really a judge of the characters, but I think the Mad Men guy is meant to be the best looking. But I think certainly out of the rest of the ragtag lot, he seems very erudite. He seems very controlled, intellectual. He seems like a reasonable person. And again, I think this sort of moves on to nicely maybe talking about the personality types of the different jurors.
Please.
And you had your kind of point around, was it passion versus persuasion, or something like that?
Passion. You want people focusing on principles and not passion.
Yeah, and I think there is that message is sort of overarches all of this, because many of the characters inside there are hotheads, are people who are ranters, who are shouters, who are they talk about angry. This is called 12 Angry Men, but this is not true. There's about 4 angry men, and they are the core of the guilty side. If I just quickly go through the juror list again,
yeah, sure. Let me get those up.
Yeah, Juror 1 is a consummately reasonable man. He gets angry once when his authority is questioned. Number 2 is the weedy guy. He gets angry when someone has a go at him, but it was like he's virtually not angry at all.
Can I just pause you there quickly?
Yeah.
I'd also point out that our second most famous person is Juror 1. Now this gets hard to evaluate. This is from 1957. We're in current year, so it's a bit hard to say objectively who was the most famous out of everyone else, but that is Martin Balsam. So he was already known for The Twilight Zone. People would, he had a decent career. He was going to go on in Psycho in 2 years. He had Cape Fear coming up. So he was sort of your, I would say, the second best known. And he is consummately just keeping it neutral. He's the foreman. He's got to. He's basically saying, don't make your mind up.
He is the beige. He's the most beige juror out of all of them.
He never gives a reason for why he changes his vote. He's the only he stays neutral in his thinking, but he does switch his vote over.
Yeah,
and you just never learn why.
Just a quick aside, sorry. Politier in chat has asked, what's the defendant's physiognomy? That the previous picture of that young boy, that is the defendant. Just to be super clear. Sorry, the one before. This is the defendant. Just to be clear. Sorry, could we go back to that list again? So number 3 is the most angry man. He is constantly shouting. He's constantly getting cross all the way through, and he is, I would say, one of the chief villains of the piece. But Juror 4 is this cool, calm, collected juror. They talk about how he doesn't even sweat in the heat, and he doesn't sweat right to the end. Juror 5 is this quite timid man. He does shout up about an issue that's personal to him. So a lot of these guys, we'll just go through the list. Yeah, they're like six again. I would say he's relatively calm. Number 7 is a very passionate guy. Number 8 is very unpassionate. Number 9 is very unpassionate. And again, number 10, the second arch villain, is this ranter. He's running around the room. He's screaming at other people. He's just talking, shouting all the time. Juror number 11, the German watchmaker, is, I would say, possibly the second most quote unquote reasonable and unpassionate man. He is never jostled by anyone else. People insult him to his face, denigrate his background, and he never rises to it at all. Next to Juror 8, he is the most perfect person there, and then Juror 12 is, I get, like, he seems a bit dumb to me, and I say that in the nicest way for my advertising colleagues. He's kind of a bit kind of like Tim Nice but dim kind of vibes. But the point is that the two arch villains, Juror 3 and Juror 10, are made out to be these men like totally at loss of their passions, while all like the key, I guess, innocent arguing jurors as we go through are all massively in control of their passions at the same time. They're very refined. So there is an interesting point here on persuasion as well. You will not convince people by shouting at them. Rarely. There are certain circumstances that we will talk through in a bit, but and I think that's one of the things that you learn as we go through the plot, is that the people who are in control, who used reason and facts and logic, they're the guys that convince the others, basically. And we are convinced too by watching it.
You know, Ferro, I kind of meant to lead in on this, but there is kind of a delicious irony that you and we are basically Juror 8 for everyone else. We're Juror 8 trying to convince them that this film is deeply subversive.
Yeah. Well, I see myself as, like, I think Juror 4 he's the third villain of the piece, effectively. He argues for guilty the entire way through, but he is like the nemesis of Juror 8. He is an equal in elocution, in intellect, in thought. He is constantly thinking rationally and logically and tying back to the point. While everyone else is like a hot mess, they are chaotic in their formulation of strategy. While Juror 4, he is kind of like the villain mastermind. However, he is defeated by facts and logic that Juror 8 drops. It
always breaks my heart because I think Juror 4 is the one I like most, and they just do him dirty. I'm not going to get into the arguments. We've got to stay away from the actual logical arguments, but I do always note that they make him drop the phrases "carry the idiot ball." So he's doing so well, but just at the moment he just has to be stupid. When he's really taking on Juror 8, he's getting some licks in, but the obvious retorts are there, and just when it's time to give them, he gets stupid. He picks up the idiot ball and he loses his match. The analogy I used is really, it's no different to the villain's gun jamming at the last second. He had the shot, but his gun jammed.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
I think
we do have to remember, like, in all of this, you always have to pull back and remember that Reginald Rose, the screenwriter, is puppeting every single one of them and can make them as smart or stupid as he wants at any given moment.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I just want to talk about those meta objectives of the film as well, and I think one of the objectives is that reason and lack of passion win around arguments. And like I said, there is a truth to that. There is a truth that through reasoned debate, the men can come to conclusions. But I think, can anyone in this modern environment see that reason doesn't matter to these people? If we think about our enemies and the establishment, you can show them all of the logic and the facts, and they will look at it and not care. It's interesting. This worked in the 50s because they were dealing with reasonable people having reasonable discussions. But what is possible? Like, what's possible in this age. I just think that even though these guys are trying to sell us on facts and logic, the reality is it doesn't work. So it's again, it's interesting. In our age, I think this film is less effective. But again, it's almost like if Ben Shapiro was was designing a film, it would be like that, basically.
Yeah, very much. I mean, that is a deep truth of this. Is realistically, we are arguing. We are all of us, every single one, you, me, people defending this film. We are all arguing from a friend-enemy position of deep instinct. And if you, if the case switched round and it was an undesirable person being charged, you wouldn't be making the argument from principle. You'd be flipping on the emotion, being like, think what this could cause. There might be riots if we let this guy out. Think about the pain and suffering caused by the family, and you're going to let him go. Think how long they've waited for justice. You'd make those arguments. You'd flip them round. You would use the tactics that you need to use to win, and we would all do this.
Yeah, 100%. So again, it's in you got to remember that it's the whole thing is set up. The game is rigged from the start. There are ridiculous landmines placed to destroy the correct position of Juror 4. But anyway, maybe should we go to your next point?
We should, yeah. We should also, I think, if we haven't made it clear, like, you, the audience, are meant to be basically identified. You look to Juror 8, but there's a mental process whereby you are kind of identifying with the other jurors as they make the arguments, and they're probably arguments that you've got in your head. And so as Juror 8 takes those down, that's meant to be sort of addressing your arguments as well and persuading you and bringing you over. This isn't an argument about a verdict in a case. It's about persuading you to this way of thinking. So I hope we've made that clear. Right, small bean, following you on the star. Be reasonable. Oh, I love this one. Okay, so I should point out that at the start, remember the puzzle. How do we get that not guilty verdict? Everyone is so keen. They're certain. They're voting guilty, right? So you don't go straight for not guilty. You try and stall. So the very first argument that happens is a contrast between Juror 7 and Juror 8. No, you notice they are adjacent. They sit next to each other. They're directly meant to be contrasted. Juror 7 comes in saying it's basically a slam dunk. Thank goodness we can be out of here quick. I've got tickets to a ball game. If you haven't seen this movie for a long time, he's literally wanting to just vote not guilty. He's got a ball game to go to. He is our first point of contact in the jury, voting guilty. And so you're looking at him, and then Juror 8 is basically the contrast point. He's like, come on, a life is on the line. I think we just need to talk about it a bit, And when you're contrasting those points of views, be reasonable, be measured. This is serious, sincere. We owe this a discussion. Versus, hang him. I've got a ball game to get to. Who do you move to? You move to Juror 8. And his initial request to just talk about it, to just think, to not rush, that looks really reasonable when you have that contrast.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points to unpack there. Firstly, in my mind, Juror 7 represents those in society that do not care for these establishments and institutions, right? You're meant to see anyone who disrespects the order of process to be this filthy, justice-hating, apparently it was a trilby, not a fedora, so apologies, this trilby-wearing lunatic. And I think it's interesting because, again, we're being suckered in to ideas of the law and democracy being successful here. We're suckered into this idea of the process works. The process works. And if you don't like the process and you just want to go home, you're a bad guy. You hate justice. And again, it's interesting. In our heads, we are building up the picture of people who operate outside of these establishments as being like this guy. So it's sort of kind of grooming us. It's teaching us that, again, if we encounter someone in reality who doesn't vote, they just don't care about justice. If you encounter someone who is cynical and disaffected with the justice system that is, broken and hates their people, you're just like this guy. You're just like Juror 7, this disgusting figure. Now, just going back to the kind of point around Juror 8 and his initial strategy, super important here, in my opinion, because as we find out through the film, this is a man who has not only thought out his position with extreme depth, right? He is considered, what we discover later is he has thought about all of the points. He has counter arguments to all of them, to such a degree that he physically goes out and collects evidence. He actually goes beyond being a juror and acts as the defendant's lawyer, effectively. However, he initially presents himself as a figure, like you said, this very, very subtle figure. Let's not rush. We owe a discussion. He doesn't give his position. He is very woolly about it. He says maybe he's innocent, maybe he's guilty. This man is a liar. Juror 8 is a liar from the start because he knows how he feels about it, but he presents himself in a different way. And I think
I love you for this, Ferro. Very few people see this, but yeah, he is he's absolutely dedicated to being certainly against the death penalty. But he keeps those cards close to. And this is kind of a fatal flaw in the film as well, because realistically, he could just say from the start, yeah, I don't believe in the death penalty. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting, and this is where I think the director gives away a huge. This is a blunder, because this is the position that the director and the filmmakers themselves have. They present themselves as these innocent, I don't know, kind of figures, but they literally have evidence in their pockets. These guys have preformed their position, so there's a weird mirroring of what the film is like here. They show themselves to be a Trojan horse of ideas, and they act exactly like Juror 8 does. Now, again, I think it's very interesting, the persuasion techniques. The idea of the fox versus the lion.
The lion.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. The fox uses subtlety and manipulation to achieve his aims, while the lion will just use power. And the figure of Juror 3, in my mind, he represents the lion. He talks about his relationship with his son, which is super important in the film. But he talks about, I want my son to be a man's man. And he has this great Chad moment where he talks about he saw his son run away from a fight in 9, and he was disgusted at his son.
Very base.
He is a powerful masculine figure. And he puts his cards on the table right from the start. He never lies through the entire thing. He is totally see-through, while Juror 8, being the fox, constantly lies throughout this process and manipulates people, and only reveals his true position when he is in a position of power. He literally waits till he can flip people over to his side. And this is you just got to see him using the voting system to, number one, out followers for his side, and number two, gain power. Okay, so just when you're watching the film, you got to watch and find out who's the one that asks for votes. And most of the time it's Juror 8, and most of the time it's when he thinks he's flipped another person over. The vote point is super important, because it's a time where you consider your position. Like when you're hearing arguments, you kind of like, oh, that's interesting on this side, but I think about this side. When you have to vote, that is putting your marker down, if that makes sense. You're having to say, I'm going down on one side or the other. So the fox here is very cunning in his approach. He seems very innocent, but there is way more depth to his discussion.
100%. Yeah, he doesn't reveal his cards, and he changes his argument based on who he's talking to. Again, it's kind of forgive the swearing, but it's actually I'll just use the abbreviation. It's BSing. He is just saying what he needs to say, and if you want a quick example of that, when it's early on, someone is saying, the kid had an argument with his dad and been hit, and that was enough to trigger the kid into murder. And so Juror 8 says, no, he got beaten every day. It's a normal occurrence. And then later, when the question is, why can't the defendant remember anything about his cinema trip? Juror 8 says, well, he'd been hit by his dad. That's deeply traumatic.
Again,
it's so sneaky.
Yeah, two huge points here. And again, firstly is this continuation of framing. So at the start, again, Juror 8's very careful about, he doesn't approach any of the facts. He is just constantly trying to reframe the character as possibly not being guilty. Now, what do we know about him? Well, we hear that the defendant has a holiday priors. He's literally a knife fighter. It's one of my favorite things. But then Juror 8 points out again he was abused by his father. His mother died or something like that as well. So again, there's this very tragic story and background to the child. But there's it's balanced by the fact that he also has a series of criminal convictions. And again, just in terms of that, the flipping the argument again, depending who he's speaking to, he will kind of turn on and off the importance of character. Sometimes he says it doesn't matter, like the kind of background of the kid. Like so, for example, this idea of prejudice is super important. Should we go into there with prejudice? Do certain groups, have certain crime statistics attached to themselves? For example, from Juror 8 perspective, he says none of that matters. If anything, it's the opposite way around. This child has been through a psychological and traumatic effect, which has changed his personality. So he basically uses the idea of character positively for himself while discounting it for other people. While
if I can just add to that, one of the tricks is that they will often have, because they've got 12 jurors, they can effectively assign a point to a juror. So they have Juror 5 in to sort of represent that background, as in, what are you saying about me? Like, hey, I know that background. I've got this background with this kid, and I can tell you, etc.
Exactly. He is kind of like the living debunkment of the stereotype, which again, like, did this ever happen? Did this ever happen where this perfect shining example of a certain community just happened to be on a case like this? Again, it's just like that. It's just so unbelievable. Moments like that. I just want to mention, just before we move on quickly, is around Juror 8's psychologizing. And again, this just, for me, just gives away the nature of both the writer and the director in the way that they approach things. They constantly talk about psychological and emotional effects. Okay, I want to go back to Juror 3. And what we hear about Juror 3 is, I was mentioning about that, the story with his son. He whips out a picture of his son and basically says, I beat the kid up. I made him a man. And then, we had a big fight and I haven't seen him for 3 years. We're meant to believe that the psychological effect of him losing his son is the reason why he considers the child to be guilty, because he hates all kids. basically. The whole thing just is just totally seen through a Freudian lens again, and so in terms of ideas of how his character built up, it doesn't matter who he is, and what his like ethnic background is. What matters is, did he have a strong father figure growing up? And conversely, for Juror 3, the fact he has these difficult relationships with his son means that he's not fit to give justice. So again, these are the same like Freudian psychological tactics that he used to convince people today, which again just aren't true.
They're working on us. Fez is right. We've been referring to him as a kid. Darn it, they got us, Ferro. We're doing our best, but they suckered us in.
Yeah, that's again. I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult to kind of disassociate yourself, but I think that's a good point. But again, I do think it kind of reveals something about the writer himself, because he keeps using it as a weapon and as a tool.
Oh, most definitely, most definitely. Also, I'm sorry for this, but there are 45 people in the chat. That's lovely on the stream. Forgive me for doing this. We are on YouTube, but now's a fine time to smash that like you had a gavel in your hand and it was the and you were just slapping down that guilty verdict and sending this adult defendant with a criminal record to the gallows.
Smash that like button like the kid's father slapped him in the face. No, I'm just joking. That's dark.
Oh, very nice. No, very nice.
Dark humor.
This is how we do it every time. It's always do something to the subscribe button and the like button, like happened in the movie. I can't think why Susan doesn't push this channel around. But yeah, I mean, since you raised it, this is it's the most important point. I moved straight. Hang on. This was kind of my one I wanted to end on, is the guilt by association, but I could basically call it the psychoanalytic angle. It is that, are you still not, and this is once he's basically turned everyone else and got them voting not guilty, then Juror 8 goes on the attack, like you said, but he does use a psychologizing earlier on. As you said, you're not meant to speculate about the defendant's background, and in case you did, there's someone from that background to talk against you. But, Juror 8 merrily speculates about the psychological motivation of some of the witnesses. They're just there for attention. I have so many people in the other video just saying, they're not allowed to add any more evidence. They've just got to go off the evidence presented. Juror 8 is, introducing psychologizing into it and speculating wildly. And that always gets allowed. But yes, he's happy to psychologize to discredit the witnesses, and then he later turns it on some of the remaining holdouts.
This is why I think the whole thing, you have to step back and say it is a total fantasy, because all the way through it he is acting like the defendant's attorney as opposed to a juror. It's kind of ridiculous. From like you said, so basically he goes out and procures a knife which is similar to the supposedly unique knife that was presented. Again, like you said, in a normal law court, this would never happen. But in this machinated circumstances, he just happens to find a knife which is similar. And again, there's loads of questions about the knife in my mind, in terms of, okay, well, you managed to find someone similar. Does that mean there's just two, or like, and no one questions it at all? And this is why I have a problem with the film, where it's just basically like going back to the BS nature of it. This whole thing is BS. No jurors are like that. They do not, like, maybe nowadays they do their own like internet research at home. That's like a well-known thing that happens. But apart from that, they will not go out and check out stuff like that. They will not try to discredit witnesses. They're like, from a strictly speaking job, their job is to look at the evidence and to assess it, not to literally discount the quality of the witnesses. So that's just something that was obviously unrelated, but it did annoy me.
Well, yeah, the knife argument is one of the ones that I'd say the cinema argument annoys me the most, but the knife is close in there because it can be persuasive, except for no one is allowed. Reginald Rose, the screenwriter, doesn't allow anyone to say, "You're making a Texas marksman fallacy." And if that's not familiar to everyone, the Texas marksman fallacy comes from the story of a Texan who fires at the side of his barn and then goes and draws a bullseye around the bullet holes. And what that means in this circumstance is that Juror 8's trying to show you that, okay, the dad was murdered by a knife that's almost exactly like the knife that the kid had, but lost. Oh, shame. Now, where is it? Oh, who knows? What a coincidence. And then he tries to say, look how common the knife is. But the real question isn't how common is that knife? It's that dad could have been bludgeoned, could have been shot, could have been hit with a wrench, a hammer, a pipe, could have been kneecapped, could have been choked, could have been poisoned. But of all the things that did him in, it was the kind of knife that the kid used and had previously used in crime, which he then lost. So you're being asked to make the wrong comparison. Sorry, I'm going into the logical arguments and I try and stay out of that because I did that already, but...
Yeah, like basically... Well, exactly. Like all of the, in my opinion, all of the arguments are total rubbish. And if you agree with the guy, you have literally got a screw loose. In my opinion, it's just absolutely filled with holes. But anyway, like I said, maybe let's go to. Do you mind if I just take us back to some of the earlier moments and just talk through some of the persuasion moments, if that's okay?
Absolutely. Feel free. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just want to talk about group dynamics a second, and for those that don't know, there's been lots of analysis from a business perspective about how groups work, because groups are the fundamental building blocks of businesses, and because of that, lots of expensive research has been done on it, and that's kind of some of the stuff that I'm interested in. And one of the first kind of group theories that were created were this idea that groups are formed of individuals, but there's a process that they go through, and many people may have heard of this before, the storming, forming, norming, and performing. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before, Harsha, at all. Yeah, so there's this idea that to make a successful group achieve a task, they have to go through these moments. And actually we do see this to a degree as well. So the storming phase is where you've got a whole lot of individuals together and they don't have a single vision or purpose or idea, but they start to kind of coalesce into groups or to clusters of people. Then they normalize and homogenize, and from that point they're able to get to their goal. And we see a similar process where at the beginning, the first 10 minutes of the film are all about little individual discussions between one or two people. So it's Juror 3 talking to Juror 7. And these are all, they're personal, they're one-on-one, not everyone else isn't listening in. And it's interesting how people are kind of talking here. This is less about convincing through argument, but more through social pressure. So a lot of it's through, what did you think? They ask a question and then they say, here's what I think. And just for those who don't know, that there is that is a persuasion technique where you're opening, you're creating you're creating the moment to persuade someone. So say, for example, if you went up to someone and said, here's my idea, they're not going to listen to you, right? If I went to the street and say, we need to cut NHS spending, just randomly. They will just walk off. You need to create an opening. We again, the same is true with with sales as well. That's what we call it. So by asking, what do you think? That is getting someone to engage with you. You're creating a connection. Your discussion of ideas are then on the table, right? So you open, you then project what you think, and then you close the discussion. And that is a very fundamental and basic persuasion tactic that most people do in their lives. Think about going to a cinema with everyone, with your friends. You will do something similar to that. What did you think? You're opening up the chance to discuss the film, and then you say, "I think this because of this, this, and this." It's when you're asking that, it's more about you. You just want to tell your idea, if that makes sense. But you can't just say, "I think it was rubbish." Okay. Now, interestingly, a lot of the discussion at that point was around personal beliefs or states. So, for example, I just got a couple of quotes. Well, the madman guy said, the attorney had drive. He mentioned it's really random, and it's not about the facts at all. It's about the people. It's very superficial, if that makes sense. You've got Juror 3 saying, or we need to slap down the kids. They're arguing from these low level points. But what starts to happen is after about the 10th minute, the Juror 1 brings them to the table, and then we enter this kind of forming phase, and then we start to get these kind of more public, complicated arguments. Now, we sort of mentioned some of these arguments before. There was a lot of arguments on authority at the beginning. So, for example, analyze the figures, you'll see it all the time, was again something that the madman guy mentioned. Whenever you're kind of referring to my sources or my figures, it's like an argument on authority. There's also something important about the hierarchy, where during that forming phase, all groups will have a hierarchy established to it. You've got people who are strong in their opinions. This is the moment where the lions dominate, basically. It's the noisy guys, it's the powerful guys, and I think it's really worth watching the first vote, because you can watch the hands go up. So when they do the first vote, you get about you get a strong group of 6 hands at the start, and then basically then a couple of seconds later, 5 other people put up their hands, and only Sigma 8 doesn't. And what that kind of shows you is that people with mixed minds will just go along with the group. And this idea of social pressure, our basic need to fit into society and the group as a whole, is important. If you were to do the vote before that initial group forming had happened, there's less social pressure. Interestingly, for example, if you and also the idea of the vote versus the blind vote.
I was just going to move on to it, but it sounds like you're doing it. So yeah, go ahead.
You go for it, so I don't keep on talking.
Okay, giving you a quick Diet Coke break. It's that thing. Very noticeably, you start off with the all hands, but Juror 8 then starts moving people into secret votes. And in the secret vote, where you're just writing it down on paper, there is less of a cost for defecting. He's trying to bring people over, and it's going to be less costly in a secret vote. They can just express their doubt there, and they're not as likely to be called out. And that's a very clever move by him.
Yeah,
he doesn't go for. He's not a lion. He doesn't come out and immediately challenge authority. He doesn't even challenge the points. He tries to wheedle around the points and make you look at different things, change the framing. Yeah, was that what you were thinking of, Ferro?
100%. The secret ballot negates the power of a kind of social pull. It's really worth just watching that first vote scene again, because you can see a lot of the strong voters, that group of 5 or 6, the 6 strong voters. They're angrily staring at everyone else. And this idea of just a look can pressurize someone into doing it. It's also brilliant watching the responses from everyone else after Sigma 8 says no. Basically, you hear lines like, "There's always one." that it's just straight up bullying. It's an attempt to buck break number eight into submission. But again, it's a testament to the character of the man that he can do it, that he can survive it. And again, it's a learning for us. Number one is when your argument is not as strong as everyone else, you need to be number one, composed and non-passionate. You need to be number two. You basically need to. You cannot go out and say your true opinion. We describe it as hiding your power levels. You have to hide your power levels. That's what number 8 was doing.
Totally.
Number 3, you then need to create winnable circumstances, and that's what that second vote's about. It's about creating a circumstance where you've got a chance.
Yeah, I think it's winnable circumstances is important. I think it is Juror 9, who is the eldest, who effectively gets persuaded into he's persuaded to change his vote out of a chance to just be heard. I think I'm trying to remember now. I'm afraid I'm hazy on it. But his motivation for changing isn't about the verdict. It's about agreeing that they need to talk out a bit. And because he's been persuaded that he doesn't want to be bullied. So he's been convinced into changing his vote for that reason. And notably, he never changes it back, which is, again, a little sneaky. But the challenge of the film is to bring everyone over. And by the way, chat, I'm really glad that you're liking it. It's lovely to see the comments.
Now, after that second vote, basically the Juror 8 gets that second person, right? And again, you just got to think about group power dynamics at the same time, right? If you are one against a full crowd, there's no chance. Having 2 people gives you a wedge in the door. That means there's a chance. So what strategy does the fox move to now? In his mind, he's smart, right? I mentioned that initial vote. The initial vote is so important because you've instantly graded the different people in the group. You've got people with strong opinions, people who aren't sure. Think about politics and voting a second. Who do the politicians chase after? It's never the stalwarts. It's always the swing voters. That's why they're always creating policies that will lure people who are defectors, who are not sure either way. And what Sigma does, he's through that public vote has identified who the weakest willed people are. Can I just say that this is really important as well, because there's a lot of weak men in that group. Like I said, number 3 is a lion, number 10 is a lion in terms of personality. There are these natural followers, those weaker men who Sigma knows he can break and build them to his side. Now, what does he do? He starts to individually speak to them and target them based on their specific needs and specific concerns. So for example, if we talk about defectors, we mentioned about jury member number 4. Was it the it's the slum guy, for example.
Slum guy, yeah, number 5.
Right. Jury member number 3 puts his foot in it by denigrating all slum dwellers, and again, that is a wedge. That's a friction.
Divide and conquer, Ferro.
But it is this is literally Frankfurt School, the coalition of minorities that Juror 8 builds up, because he, like I said, he peels off the old man first, who basically just his argument is, I just want to hear more. His is very weak. He clearly is mentally deluded. That first juror. He then peels off the slum dweller. He then pulls off the working class member. He then pulls off the German watchmaker. He basically builds up the Frankfurt School coalition of minorities live in the film. And what's so fascinating to me, this film is like meta commentary of what happens in America over the next 40 or 50 years or so, using exactly the same tactics. This is almost kind of like the elite map, like the Fox elite, who are coming into power, saying, "This is what I'm going to do to you boys. I'm gonna destroy the lions. I'm gonna peel off all of these kind of weaker-willed men and bring them to my side," basically. So
Yeah,
there's something.
Fez already called it. It's totally. It is a demo, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And you also see that so many of them are like genuinely disinterested. They're not engaged. They're just going about it. They go with common sense. They go with the herd, and it does make them very easy pickings.
Yeah. Just want to talk about some other interesting tactics that go on. So basically, during the second discussion phase, so after that second vote, they the Juror 8 manages to frame it from from an attacking perspective already. So what they agree to is to go around one by one, explaining why they believe the defendant is guilty. So again, rather than a position of defense where the guy who is causing all of this problem has to explain himself more than, "I just think we should have a discussion," which is a BS answer.
Yeah, and he
he
totally hasn't done his justification yet.
exactly he puts the onus on them. Now there's a really interesting moment when when he's got like the majority of the people, and there's a similar situation later, and he doesn't have any qualms in putting the pressure on. No, it's right at the end, actually. It's when when number 3 is the last man standing. Number 8 hits him hard and says, "You tell me why. What's your reasons why?" So basically, in the first instance, he's set himself up to win, and he's happy to use. He's happy to not use the tactics that he used before, if that makes sense. He's taking every advantage, and again, I think this is the Machiavellian realist nature of power. Number 8 is willing to use any means necessary to achieve his win. He is not willing to have this kind of free and fair approach or a reasoned approach. He doesn't play fair. He cheats and is nasty about it at the same time. He is aggressive when he's actually turns quite horrible when he's in the lead. He isn't this meek and mild questioner of discussion anymore. He is literally going for the jugular constantly.
100%, and that is really what is at play in this point. Is effectively it's a shaming tactic. Like they use group pressure at multiple points, sometimes on the large scale, just involving one of the jurors dissenting. But in the point that I've got in the background here, it's the entire jury dissenting, effectively using a shaming tactic to say that basically you can't do this. And in this case, it's expressing the absolutely forbidden opinion that immigrant communities can be a bit dangerous and stabby. Absolutely awful opinion, heaven forfend, and the whole room turns their back on him. But you've got to remember, this is also a message to the audience. This is unthinkable. This cannot be said. And that's how that juror is basically broken. But then as you say, Juror 8, when he's at the height of his power, he's then just got Juror 3, and then it's kind of a combo attack of Juror 8, but also the screenwriter Reginald Rose. Like, he's got that last guy, but he's holding out, he's not convinced. But luckily, he just so happens to have a brutal, awful psychological flaw that we can expose. And what do you know? Gosh darn it.
The kid again. Yeah, exactly.
It's the gun jamming at the last moment. But also, it's just reserved for him. No one else gets this. No one else gets their Freudian revelation moment. It's just this guy who's holding out, because why else would you not vote not guilty? Everyone reasonable agrees. So you must be, as Juror 8 says, a sadist.
Just for those listening, the correct strategy would be to have adopted jurors 8 strategy at the beginning, which is to basically to stall for time and create more discussion. Because interestingly, there were people at the very end who were flipping between the two. Specifically, the Mad Men guy was going between the two. He really wasn't sure, and I could have easily gotten a hung jury. I feel in reality, all he needed to say was around, we need some more discussion, we need some more time on it. And again, it was this ridiculous breakdown scenario. Again, just a total fantasy, absolute fantasy, like this ever happened in any jury situation. And to basically simply say, oh, we need more discussion, or you've got some good points about these witnesses, but I don't think you can say that there's doubt, but I don't think there's reasonable doubt. And again, I think that's, you've got to play in the grey area at that point. There's a few other tactics. Sorry, I want to just flip back to you there a second.
Oh, please go ahead.
Now, there's a really interesting moment. I was talking through how each of the jurors were having to defend their own guilty position, right? Juror 10 notices that this is a BS, that they've ended up in a BS situation, basically, and he tries to disrupt the whole procedure and gets number 8 to defend himself. And I thought that was such a brilliant moment of putting the pressure back on again. And I want to say again, if you're placed in a situation where, again, you're effectively in a trap, you're on the back foot, you can mix things up. And what number 10 does is he literally just stands up and just starts ranting at it and just totally disrails the situation. And again, this disrailing tactic is one that you should use and you can use to win situations. Now, I want to give a real life example of this. Because I'm a cruel person, I would use this tactic during interviews. If you want to really understand the quality of a candidate, I don't know if you've ever had to hire someone before a horror show.
Afraid so.
Yes. It's often a very cringe experience. But one tactic I like to do for more senior roles was to basically have a couple of other people in the room to start with, and you would enter late into the discussion. And what happens is that during those first 10 minutes, you've got this kind of initial rapport building, someone who's a bit nervous, may build up a little bit of information. But by coming into the room late and asking some tough questions immediately, you sort of disrail the entire proceedings, if that makes sense. And so people who are, the problem with interviews is that people who interview well win, if that makes sense. It's not about...
Oh, it's all nonsense. Yeah,
it's often not about ability. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're not allowed to test the things, or it's rare you can test someone in a circumstance that they'll actually have to prove themselves in.
Exactly. So basically, by doing this derailing tactic, I often found that people who are good at chatting would have to sort of reset. They're not used to it, if that makes sense. They hadn't thought of it. And would often give themselves away as bad candidates. So again, if you're in a situation where you're on the back foot and you're having to explain yourself, literally just do what Juror 10 did: stand up, start ranting, start putting the pressure back on the correct person. And he's successful. That was one of the big wins for the team early on, for the guilty team, is that all of a sudden Juror 8 had to go on the back foot, and that's when he had to drop his first bit of big evidence, the knife, at that point, interestingly. Okay. Just a few other things.
Juror 4 should have immediately called the foreman over and said, disqualify this man.
Yeah, again, or like literally had him arrested for committing it. Like, again, this shows a total lack of ability to use power. Literally everyone in there was a cuck for not getting the law in to win. That's an insta-win circumstance. Surely, again, if I was Juror 3, I would have immediately called in the police and got this guy arrested for being such a smart ass. Firstly, anyway, a couple of other things that Juror 8 does again is around poisoning the well, around the defense, which I thought was really interesting. So this idea of placing doubt in people's minds. Doubt's such like an important word all the way through this discussion, because people start off with such definite opinions, and Juror 8 is just constantly dripping poison in people's ears. He's constantly just chipping away at what they think is true, making them question stuff. Now, there was obviously some discussion about doubt and reasonable doubt. In my mind, nothing can be known for certain, right? There is always an element of doubt into it, but is it reasonable? For example, discussions around the motive were ridiculous. I think the motive was obviously there for anyone can see, and it was easily dismissed by Juror 8 and was never discussed again. He just got an absolute free pass on that.
Totally. But as you, I imagine, notice is one of the other weapons that the director and screenwriter utilize is that we don't actually see the trial. So we are relying entirely on what is reported to us, which is quite handy for sneaking by lots of doubt and lots of new information. And you get things like Juror 8 saying, well, the defense attorney just didn't care. He was just lazy, which is, again, more psychologizing thrown in there.
Yeah, exactly. He built up this big story about how the lawyer was this young guy who didn't care about his. Literally, it's just literally just such an utter snake and a liar and a cheat. I just have so much disrespect for Juror 8. It is literally just an absolute subversive figure. Disgusting man.
You've got to respect how good he is at subverting, though.
No,
I mean, if he had come out and just saying, look, BT Dubs guys, I'm totally anti-death penalty, I will never vote for it, they'd have chucked him off. He knew to hide his power level.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, other tactics he used was placing himself in the kids' shoes. So again, seeing the world through their shoes. Often it's about when you're trying to convince someone, rapport is super important, I think. There's a really interesting bathroom discussion that I think it's Juror 7, who's the sports fan, who it turns out is actually a sales guy. I think part of the reason why he's so disengaged with the process is that he can see through the BS. He can see it's just two people selling something to him. You can't con the con man. Best of all, he is like America's greatest marmalade salesman, it turns out. Now, what he basically confronts Juror 8 and says, you do the soft sell really well. This idea of convincing people not through hard facts, but by through emotional and psychological engagement. Now, what he says is, what I do is I use like tricks. I think it's a weird way of discussing it. Tricks and tips and jokes. And what that shows to me is that the power of rapport with people. You can if you can make people like you, you can sell anything to them. And I think that's like at the start, Juror 8 becomes this very likable person. He's like, he's just such a reasonable guy. He's such an intellectual guy. There is a power to silence as well, where I think, you're not revealing how stupid you are, if that makes sense. At one point, the broker literally says to Juror 3, just shut up, because you're not helping with the situation. And that's again the problem that these passionate men, these passionate lions have in the situation, is that they massively overpower and kind of overstate their opinions, so no one wants to listen to them at all. So just in the same way that Juror 7 builds up rapport using jokes, etc., you need to get people to like you to convince them as well, and that's something he's very good about that.
They also put the work in, again, associating the guilty verdict with the bigots. They throw that in there as well to make that other side more likable. There's also part of that persuasion. I've just got this up. I thought I'd try and get that in. Your intellectual frame is going to be. It's got a preference for novelty, and it's just not interesting if the obviously guilty guy is guilty.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean,
you want the surprise. You're already kind of ready to help them get that verdict because you want the surprise and turnaround. And it's also packaged in with something that's a bit of an ego fantasy. Especially, I've got to say, for screenwriters, they do this over and over again. Is that
well,
they want the smart guy in the room to win just through
yes,
having a big IQ.
that's why his job as the architect is so important, because it's the intellectual class, it's the upper middle class, the right on. Aren't we just smarter than these stupid work? It's like, but it's also all the bad guys are like business owners. These like small business owners. These like there is like a snobbishness to it as well. This kind of intellectual snobbery where the architect acts like the shepherd of the working man. He looks after these stupid people. There's the stupid working class man. He literally says, I can't suppose anything. My boss does the supposing for me. Literally the boss does the thinking for me. And he almost acts like this kind of paternalistic guide to him. That's how they see themselves. They don't see these as equals or a family that should be looked after and maintained. They see them as sheep to be corralled into various areas, and their enemies as these kind of loudmouth oaths. One interesting thing on the after the secret ballots I've got down as well was around Juror 10 going like, who was it? Who was quite aggressively attacking the different jury members to try and find out who was the person that flipped. And one thing I wrote down here for notes was, this is always a bad idea because you need to maintain as much as win ground. So trying to create a witch hunt as to find out who the person in was a terrible idea. And what happens is juror number 3 attacks juror number 5, the slum dweller, and says it was you. And it turns out it wasn't him. And, I mentioned about that rapport. All rapport between juror 3 and 5 has been vaporized at that moment, making juror 5 easily flips later, and unsurprisingly, he does. So when you're trying to win an argument in a room or a group of people, make sure you're constantly keeping people on side. Make sure you keep throwing that red meat across the room to keep those people happy, because you need to maintain your position. It's like it's not just about chasing after the enemy, basically.
Also, throw in more issues. He has to disrupt a unified decision. So bring up as many issues as possible. Every issue is an area for disagreement. And if someone disagrees on some level, you can bring them across.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, just other little power moves that Sigma does as we go through the film as well. After he gets his second person, he literally stands up at the table to kind of present his arguments. This is sort of the turning point where he starts to go from I'm just this questioning guy. Let's just have a discussion, yo. Let's just peace out, man. To
Be reasonable.
Yeah, exactly. He stands up, and there is power in height. I know this is. I'm sorry, manlets. This is a terrible moment for you, but like, height does actually give you authority at the same time. If everyone's sitting down at the table and you're the one standing, you have power. That's why you never present like your slides or your talk in a group setting sitting down. In my opinion, I will always stand up, because it gives you additional power at the same time.
Do you power pose? We need to know. Are you power posing?
I mean, I admire many power poses. I personally feel I can't say who my favorite power poses are on this stream, I'm afraid. Let's okay. What I was always taught was to never move around. Always have your eyes focused on the audience, and then rotate who you're looking at, so everyone feels engaged. I will normally try and keep my hands. I like gesticulate quite wildly usually, so that's my big problem. They'll fly around like a I don't know, like an Italian, like a drunk Italian, basically. So, but I do not pose while I'm talking, basically. But that's something to consider. But he does really well. He stands up. He speaks to different people, and he gets that height. He also does a brilliant power move where Juror 3 and Mad Men start playing noughts and crosses, which again, that is quite a power move already, which is basically a big FU to Juror 8. It's sort of like saying, I don't care what you have to say. And again, I think that's quite a good move for a weaker person. But then Sigma comes across and literally rips up the noughts and crosses game. Again, this is about establishing who's the boss. This is the silverback gorilla jumping on the table and beating his chest, saying, listen to me right now. So again, it's interesting. It's just such like a base psychological hierarchy at that point, but it's very, very powerful.
And as you say, waiting for the right moment to do it. He assesses the support he's got in the room.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, he's constantly looking for the weak men. He's looking for the people who have not made up their minds and people who are easily swayed, and he's targeting them. He literally picks them off one by one, targeting issues that affect them. With the slum guy, he tries to convince that, like, he tries to highlight about, slum dwellers are actually, they're really good people. They just had a hard time. It's just the society. If only, we live in a society. If we can sort out society, the slums will be fine, kind of thing. Okay, other notes I've got was hilarious moment was when the German immigrant finally pipes up. The first thing he says, he has made some notes, which made me laugh a lot because that's just the most Germanic response to the situation. It's like, I have some list of notes that I've made. I think the strongest arguer here is very much the broker. Again, he's just constantly trying to go back to reason. But again, he's sort of playing within the narrative that the filmmaker wants, this kind of meta narrative. He wants you to, if you are going to be a dissident, you need to be like Broker. You need to be this intellectual guy. You need to be this cool, calm guy. Don't be passionate. Just be facts and logic. In some ways, the Broker in my mind is like the controlled opposition. They're trying to mold you into being like him. When in some ways you need to be like Juror 10, who just like rips up the script when he like starts flying around. And again, if it wasn't for these ridiculous psychological, so basically Juror 3 gets done in by the psychological moment. Juror 10 suffers from the ridiculous I'm literally turning my back on you moment. If anyone knows, again, sorry for the base cultural reference, the Mighty Boosh, there's a moment where they have like they sort of turn their back on each other as an act of shame. And there's a moment where literally everyone stands up and turns their back on Juror 10 to shame him for his evil racist stereotypes of this unknown ethnicity.
Are you having those concerns, audience member? Are you noticing? Are you suffering a case of noticing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no prejudice.
It is. I really like that point you made. That Juror 4, the Broker, the nemesis of Sigma 8, is still losing because he's in the let's go facts and logic mode. Which, as this whole stream is about, it's not about facts and logic. It's not about an argument. It's about persuasion tactics. It's about bringing you over via any kind of emotional means we can. So instead of trying to be like, let's construct a logical paradigm which can be quibbled, and then you're just like, I don't know, we could reasonably doubt it, etc. You should be going like Juror 10, Juror 3, and just be hitting them with, would you want this, if this guy was in your neighborhood, would you want him guilty? Do you want him back?
Yeah, exactly. Juror
would you
10
feel safe? What would you vote if he was in your apartment block?
Yeah. I mean, Juror 10 after that turn his back on him, just shuts up for the rest of the thing. Basically, that's like he's officially shamed. And breaks as well. So again, it's just like a ridiculous moment. People don't act like that, no one, literally, if everyone turned their back on me, I would just like laugh and carry on and just be like, screw you guys. Juror 10 is kind of like Bap in some ways. He is this kind of like vital warlord like figure that just has no respect for authority or the system itself. Basically, I really like him. He makes me laugh quite a lot. Okay, I've just got some other little persuasion notes. Okay,
Cool.
I want to talk about the use of props here.
Mm.
So, the use of items to draw attention and to capture interest is so important to Sigma's strategy during this. For example, he pulls in the knife from from the exhibits pile or whatever, and then he literally throws his second knife on the table and jabs it into the wood. And it's obviously a dramatic moment for the film, but it's also about using a prop to create attention. There's another brilliant moment when he gets the apartment plan. But by getting the apartment plan, he sucked you into his world at that moment. If you watch the shots, everyone is looking at him. Everyone is looking at the plan. As humans, we interestingly look to other human beings first, right? If you were to there's some advertising psychology which basically states the first thing that people do when they look at an advert is to look at other human beings, but the second thing they do is to look at what's in their hands and what they're looking at. So, have you ever heard of like active listening before?
That's where, in the conversation, to active listen, you would try and repeat phrases back to the person to show you've paid close attention.
Yeah, exactly. And also to kind of keep watching the speaker. So say, for example, you're in a group setting and you agree with someone, and someone's talking and you agree with them. The best thing you can do is to really look to the person who's speaking and then nod along, basically, to really look like you're actively engaged. Because with that, like, I was talking about, like, we look at humans and then we look at what the humans are looking at or what they're doing or they're holding, if that makes sense. You're sort of, anyone who looks at you is then immediately looks to see, what is this guy agreeing with? So you're sort of passing them back to the speaker and kind of it sounds lame, but channeling the energy in the room towards the speaker. The prop does something similar to that, where through the exhibit, he is channeling everyone's attention. So even if you don't agree with him, even if you don't care about what he's trying to do, you are in his world at that moment. You're engaged with his idea. It's so hard to not look at the gigantic map. Do you know what I'm saying? Again, the best thing to do at that point is to literally stand up and leave the table again. But
he's marshalling them. He's just giving them orders. He's raising his status via all these things. I mean, there's a little quibbling of his method, where someone points out, like, you're doing it too slow, and he's like, "Oh, okay, I'll speed up a bit."
Yeah, but that's the fact you're playing his game. He does that experiment. You've already lost. You're in his world at that point. The best 100%. Thing to do is to discount the experiment again, and to be like, this is not admissible evidence. What you're doing is against what we should be doing, which is to analyze the evidence presented to us during the trial. This is all additional bullshit. Sorry, BS. Sorry, monetization destroyed at this point. It's also the experiment is also a PR stunt at the same time. It's about attention. It's about focus. Everyone's keeping their eyes on him. Even his ridiculous walk. It's just such evil cunning to capture everyone and to make them engaged. Because one of the other again, if I was in the guilty party, one strategy.
Oh, sorry about that. Crikey.
That's the scary horror door that you have that you open to scare everyone like halfway through your streams.
It's a distraction tactic. I'm derailing.
It is exactly. Yeah. One of the tactics I would have done though is to basically just like not listen to him at all, just to like switch off entirely, and then just not engage whatsoever. And get the hung jury. Do you know what I'm saying? That's one plan you could have done, where you just switch off entirely, disengage with all of the little games that he's playing at the same time. Also,
do you think sort of like basically naming the tactic is like, look, this guy has one goal and one goal alone. He's just trying to vote not guilty. He's got some other reason. Maybe he's one of those activists. All he's done is argue against this. Like, if you point out, like, he says he's open-minded, but the only thing he's done is argue for a not guilty and sow doubt. Like, do you think that would work as a tactic?
Yeah, maybe. I feel like you just got to discredit all of his tools, if that makes sense. What this guy's got is he's using his toolkit to win people around. Whether it's again the psychologizing of the background, whether it's the like quibbling with facts, whether it's the use of experiments. What you need to do is basically saying, look, this experiment isn't valid. It's not valid. It wasn't done at the time. Don't talk about it. We shouldn't be listening to it. We need to focus on what was presented to us at the time. You going out and picking up a knife, not only it was an illegal and unlawful activity, it's not inadmissible and is not relevant to this situation. There is no way that we can do an audit of all of the knives that look like that in the country. It could be just total. It could be just total coincidence that you found.
You could have got him chucked off and could have got a backup jury member in.
But it's like even outside the chucking off, it's kind of like how we're meant to believe that you went to that place. It's on trust that you went there. So do you know what I'm saying? Like there is no burden of proof on this guy. All of his tools need to be debunked. I love. I'm all for attacking the character of a person. That's good. Like for some people, I think for the weaker-minded people, you can do more of those like bullying tactics, basically, just to again discredit the person. But I don't. I think he's too strong-minded and too intellectual to do that too. But to again highlight his sneakiness and his subversive nature. Again, the noticing is very important. But like noticing what he does, I think is important. When he gets to about 50%, it starts to rain as well, which I think, again, that's prophetic fallacy, which is also important. Should we talk about the movies moment with the broker? Because, again, I do think that's super important as well.
Definitely.
This is another experimental game that he plays on the broker. Do you want to maybe just take people through what happened, if you remember?
Sure. So we got to remember that juror number 4, the broker, is the nemesis, and I'll just get up a photo of him so you can see. You're going to see how cool, calm, and collected he is. But he's really the guy who is the intellectual challenge, and he's concerned with the alibi of the defendant. There we go. You've got juror 4 in the top right, and the defendant's got this weak as anything. Oh, I can't remember anything. I went to the cinema. No one saw me there. I don't have a ticket. I can't remember what film I saw. And at some point along the way, I forgot my knife. I lost a knife. And then very cleverly, Juror 8 says, but the defendant can't remember any of the essential details on questioning. But later in the trial, he remembers all the details. That's something Juror 8 says. He answered all those questions. He had all the details in the trial. And Juror 4 says, yeah, after the lawyer briefed him. So very Chad moment from Juror 4, calling out the nonsense. And Juror 8 then tries to turn the tables. Okay, so the question is, how reasonable is it that you can't remember the film you saw that evening? And so he asked Juror 4, what did you do last night? And Juror 4 knows exactly. And so he goes back another day, and another day, and another day. And I think he's 4 days back before
Yeah, it's the Monday, and I think they're on a Thursday, aren't they?
Yeah, it's like that. And they even make a joke about, you're going to go back into last year. And after going back 4 days, and then Juror 4 gets all the answers about his main film, they start picking on the B movie, and he gets a word in the title of the B movie wrong. Oh.
Yeah, he doesn't get the title. He doesn't get the second. It's not even the main movie. It's the second showing, because they used to do back-to-backs or whatever, back-to-back movies.
Yeah, it's the B movie that he didn't even go to see for. But if he can't remember one detail in the film that wasn't even the main attraction, the alibi is absolutely fine.
But again,
very midwit.
This is it. This is it again. You got to challenge the tool he's used. The tool he's doing is to highlighting to everyone how difficult it is to remember things. Okay. I mean, again, maybe he has a point to that, but what I would argue is it's not a like for like case. This isn't it's not the same day, etc. And fundamentally, even if you're right, and there's a chance that he can't remember it, he still doesn't have an alibi, and no one brings that up at all. In my mind, again, what are we looking for here? We're looking for, was it the I'm sure the chat will remember. Is it actus reus, actus mens? The
mens rea and actus reus.
There you go.
Yes, we've got the act. Do we have the motive? The mens rea is the guilty mind component of the crime. So
Sure.
did he intend?
Yeah, and in my mind, that the motive is never debunked correctly. There is no alibi, and he had the murder weapon. And in my opinion, he would be fried if I was there. But again, it's another sneaky tactic, and I'm very disappointed with the broker. Again, this is why he's just this total false opposition, whatever, controlled opposition, because he folds just at the right moment. He's
they
so
throw
so
the
strong and
idiot ball
brave,
to him, and he catches it.
and he never questions the alibi again, even though he has some of the best arguments. So again, I mean that's the last thing I had in terms of little persuasion tactics. So again, I think the key thing is to I mean, this is a specific kind of engagement. It's a group discussion between people, and we're often not placed in this kind of situation. I mean, I think actually this is most like a work-like situation. And if you want to convince people at work to take on your project or to do what you want to do, you can use some of those tactics. And like I said, if you start to see people using some of those tools, you got to call them out on it. But I think the most important thing is to be in control of the passions is super important, but to know when to use them is also important, because again, Juror 8 unleashes hell towards the end. He's very, very passionate in the way he's speaking, and very aggressive in the way he's speaking. He's just controlled about it. That's the difference. You want to, again, your passion and your the way that you speak should be like I know, like a sniper rifle, not like a shotgun or whatever. You want to pinpoint it and to channel it to a specific moment to maximize its power, rather than just constantly go off all the time, because you miss the effectiveness of it. But that's basically it from my overall specific moments. I just wanted to maybe finish off with a few last thoughts, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Rock on.
Just stepping back a second, like I said, let's go back to those objectives that we talked about at the start. We are suckered in to believe that this guy is not guilty from the start because of the framing. All of the people who are on the not guilty side are these like quiet, polite, reasonable people. The slum juror, the German watchmaker, the architect. They're all good. Everyone else just happens to be, these horrible, racist, nasty men. So we want to associate ourselves. We see ourselves naturally as good and reasonable, so we want to project ourselves onto those people. But it's very the film does that, but then it also, because you've bought into this idea that juries are like that prejudice shouldn't happen. I'm very much of the opinion that prejudice should be looked at. Stereotypes are there because of a reason and should be factored in. I'm not saying they should be used as the only tool we have, but as a heuristic, they are useful and are valid. And those ideas, where we end up with this egalitarian, flattened view of everyone, where everyone is the same. In fact, if anything, these kind of weaker minorities within society are virtuous people, and the barbarous lions who existed from the First World War should be shunned and removed and not talked to. Again, it's just fascinating how the tactics stay the same. The idea of deplatforming. They literally deplatform Juror 10 with the back turning. It's identical to what they do today basically. So it's a very clever film because it's convincing for those who are just casually watching, but for those of you, probably the people listening now, who have the trained eye, can see through the fantasy that's created, this totally false moment used that sets it up as just this, this reasonable warrior of light. The architect himself wears a white jacket. I think he's the only one. He's like this angelic figure. He also, at the end, literally helps Juror 3 with his jacket. At the end, Juror 3's had this meltdown. He helps him out. What a good guy. What an outstanding guy. But in my mind, Juror 8 is a liar and a deceiver. He is Lucifer's right hand man. He is a demon in the skin of a man, who should be shamed and we should be disgusted at. And the director of the film, in my mind, is a deeply subversive man who does not care for America, has no love for its people, but wants to create a flattened, homogenized society. And he was successful. This looking back 50 years, or even longer than that, 70 years, they were successful in doing it, and their vision won through because of films like this. This was immensely popular. If you look at the Rotten Tomatoes rating, it's like 95%. This is the original propaganda. This is, I had my tweet saying that the Greatest Generation were worse than the Boomers. This is done by someone from the Greatest Generation, so-called Greatest Generation.
They raised the Boomers, where did the Boomers get it from?
Or didn't raise the Boomers. If you see, they did a very poor job, I think. But this is like weapons grade level propaganda. This is very, very strong stuff that's hard to resist. But when you even look at some of the basic facts, in my opinion, it's irrefutable that this is just a total lie the whole way through, a total setup. We are like rubes in a carnival that have been brought in by the shiny lights and are tricked by a nasty carny, and we leave we've lost our money, but we've got a smile on our face at the end of it. So that's the last thing I'll say. You
are an absolute star. Yes. I'll just point out before I give my little summation, oh man, I was nodding along so much behind that. I was actively listening, Ferro. I was just nodding along, looking at your avatar. We've got
I want the chat to actively listen to a horror show for this last part, please.
Oh, cheers. Well, I'll just say thank you to the NREV. £10 for it, much appreciated. 1-2 super nannies coming for you, Ferro. If that makes no sense, don't worry about it. I'm appreciating the Nightmare on Elm Street homage here. 3-4, better oil your door. I have been shamed. Fair play. 5-6, grab a cruiser reach. The NREV, I did not do a gay reading of this film, but I could. 7-8, never stay up late. 9-10, never sleep again. Thank you so much for the £10 and for the tribute. I like it very much. Yeah, this is pure high octane boomer fuel. This is a film that everyone cites as amazing screenwriting and a lesson in civilization, high-minded, sophisticated civilization, overcoming base impulses and prejudice to make a mature, democratic, considered, intelligent decision. This is what it tries to sell you on. It is pure boomer truth, and it is flattering your ego. It aims to tell you, after absolutely hornswoggling you with terrible arguments and manipulation, that you have done the good thing by being dispassionate and following a process to release a murderer into someone else's neighborhood. I want to see the sequel to 12 Angry Men, where we see the defendant back again on his next charge, and they go, whoops. Maybe just like a short of just like them all reading the newspaper and seeing him busted again for shooting up a convenience store, something like that. I'd love to see that. Just like a little short. Could we deep fake it? I'd love to see it. Yeah, this is the main message. Is it's shaming you for noticing. It is shaming you for making your own judgments, encouraging unbelievable levels of divorce from reality, and just praising you for making other people vulnerable. You know, it where you don't have skin in the game yourself. You don't live in that neighborhood. You don't live in that apartment block. So you can afford to be incredibly principled, and you can pat yourself on the back as you walk out into a now clear-skied daylight, having done a good job. Deeply, deeply subversive. Yeah, I think that's kind of everything. Hopefully the comments on this are going to be amazing, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, exactly. I challenge anyone listening here. If I'm a reasonable person, if you can in chat comment out a strong argument for why this guy was not guilty, I will tweet it out on my Twitter feed and admit that I was wrong. So that's your challenge. Come up with your best counter argument in the comments.
Yeah. We will have to round up the stream now, but yes, I'll be keeping an eye on the comments for this. But yeah, I have pointed out in the description to this is my original video where I actually look at the logical arguments. I highlight 4 of them just to show you how tricky the film is. I've also highlighted Poe's video, which takes another stance that you can do, which is basically looking at the probability of it not being this kid. How many contingencies do you need to multiply to make him not guilty? Which is another interesting way of looking at it. But I think that is pretty much everything. The other really important thing in the description is a link to Ferro's Twitter. I'm sure all of you are following him already and looking at every stream he does. Hopefully, if you weren't, you are now. Because I thought you knocked out of the park on this one.
If you aren't right now, I'm gonna have to get out a large exhibit. I have to use it like an online prop to point out to check out my Twitter channel and get your attention. But no, I just want to thank you so much for having me on. It's been really fun. It was great to rewatch it recently just to get my brain up to speed again. And again, if you haven't seen it for a while, I would highly suggest watching through it again, having heard us, and make your own decision about it, because I think you'll be shocked and surprised by just how bad it actually is.
Absolutely. All right, with that, I think that is everything. So I'll thank you again, Ferro. Really enjoyed this. And if you ever fancy coming on to talk on a far more base level about horror movies, you would be very welcome.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you very much, chat. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to sign off there and say, as I always do, thanks, y'all. Cheers.